So one of the really important skills that we need to know is the difference between rounding and estimating. So we're going to start by talking about what is rounding. So think about these two questions and see if you can answer them in your notebook. So what does it mean to round a number? And when would I use rounding? When would I round a number outside of math class? So in the real world, not at school. Okay, go ahead and pause the video if you need more time to think about that. So rounding is when I change a number to make it into an easier number to work with. So I can round a number up and make it into a larger number, or I can round a number down and make it into a smaller number. I normally would be given a place value that I would need to round within. So based on this number line, I'm rounding to the nearest 10. So you can see here that I have the closest 10 below my number 33, and I have the closest 10 above my number 33. So in this case, I'm wondering which 10 is 33 closer to? The 10 before it, which is 30, or the 10 after it, which is 40? So in this case, we would round it down to 30, because 33 is only 3 jumps away from 30, whereas it's 7 jumps away from 40. Notice this center point tells us, can help us figure out if we need to go up or down. So now if I'm looking at this number, now it's in the center, and I want to round it to the nearest whole number, so it's between 0 and 1. How do I decide if it rounds up or down? Go ahead and pause the video if you need some time to think about it. So this number is 1/2, or 0.5, and technically it is equally distanced from both 0 and 1. However, mathematicians needed to create a rule that worked 100% of the time so that there was no confusion if different people were doing it. So we say that if it's half or more, then it rounds up. So 0.5 or 1/2 would round up to 1 whole if I was rounding it to the nearest whole number. Okay, so make sure you include that in your notes so that you have it to look back on. So when I'm using a number line to round a number, the first thing that I need to do is I need to figure out what I'm rounding it to. So in this case, I'm rounding 367 to the nearest 10. So I need to label my number line with those 10s. So the 10 before 367 and the 10 after. So if I label my number line, I'm looking at the numbers between 360 and 370. So if this is 360, 361, 362, 363, 364, 365, 366, 367. So 367 would go right where my mouse is now, which would mean that it is closest to 370. So again, include this example in your notebook. So if I want to round 4.556 or 4 and 556 thousandths to the nearest hundredth, first I need my number line, and then to figure out where are the hundredths. So remember when we did our notes on place value, we have the tenths and then the hundredths. So we're looking at this place value in order to line up my number line. So the hundredth before this would be 55 hundredths, and the hundredth after this would be 56 hundredths. I'm going to go ahead and fill in my number line. Notice I don't have the 0 there for the thousandths. Okay, because I've rounded it, I don't actually have an exact number of thousandths anymore. So instead of saying 0 thousandths there and saying 550 thousandths, I know that it's rounding to 55 hundredths or 56 hundredths. So we don't include the zeros after the last digit with value when we're rounding. It's really important to show if we had that 0 there, it would say that we know that specifically that digit is a 0 and we don't. That's actually the part that we've cut off. So if I look at 556 thousandths, this is 55 tenths, which would also be 550 thousandths. So 51, 52, 53, 54, 55, 56. So right here would be 4 and 556 thousandths, and you can see that that is closer to 56 hundredths than it is to 55 hundredths. So we would round this up to 4 56/100ths. Again, please include these examples in your notebook. Pause the video at any time when you need to have time to write things down. So I'm talking about money. Most currencies, not all, but most currencies round money to the nearest hundredths. Pesos round to the nearest hundredths, US dollars round to hundredths. And so in order for me to take something like this, because sometimes when I do math with a number, especially division, I end up with more place values than I need, I'm going to take and look in the thousandths place, and I'm going to ignore everything after the thousandths, because those will not affect the hundredths, okay? And I'm going to look, is the thousandths place closer to the next hundredth or closest to the hundredth before? So in this case, I have 9 thousandths. 9 thousandths is closer to a hundredth or 10,000th than it is to 0 thousandths. So this one would round up to $10.46. Go ahead and try these other three in your notebook. Again, write them down in your notebook and pause the video while you're working. So next we're going to talk about estimating and how estimating is different from rounding. So when I estimate, I actually do round, but I round before I've done any math. So that's really important. So in rounding, I have an exact number and I'm changing it into a number that looks different for some reason. It might be because I don't care about the exact answer. It might be because the exact answer has more place values than matter, or than I can use, like something with money. Estimating, on the other hand, tells me that I have some kind of math I need to do. So there's some kind of an equation that I'm trying to solve, and I'm going to round first to make the math easier. Okay, so again, I'm not getting an exact answer and then changing it. I'm actually doing the changing before I've done the math. Some reasons why I might want to estimate is it's easier for mental math. So if I'm trying to do math in my head and the exact answer doesn't necessarily matter, but I need it to be close, estimating is really useful for that. Another reason why I might want to use estimating is to check my work. So if I am doing a complex math problem and I do need the exact answer, sometimes it's helpful to estimate it first so I can make sure that I'm in the right ballpark. And I can make sure I haven't made some kind of crazy error in my math. Sometimes it's I totally put the decimal point in the wrong place when I was doing out my calculation. Sometimes it's I really struggle to work with fractions, or maybe it's I was using a calculator and I forgot to hit a digit, or I pressed too many times. So estimating can help you check your work. So for instance, if I'm trying to do 32 times 18 and I don't have a calculator and I don't want to take the time to write it all out, it's going to take some time to do that math, it might be easier for me to change that problem into 30 times 20. So I rounded both of those numbers so there's only one non-zero digit. And now I know 3 times 2 is 6, and then I have 10 times 10, which is 100. So I end up with 600, which is close enough to 32 times 18 that it doesn't matter. Estimate. If I'm trying to make sure that I have enough money for something, if I'm trying to make sure that there's enough seats on the bus, estimating usually can help you with those problems. If I throw some decimals in, now I have 3 2/10 times 9/10, or 3.2 times 0.9. In this case, I have a couple of choices of how I want to estimate it. You might notice that 9/10 is really close to 1, and we're pretty good at multiplying by 1. So I can say that I can leave it as 3.2 and then times it by 1, and that would give me more of an exact answer. The more numbers you change and the more you change that number by, the farther your estimate is from the exact answer. Usually that's okay as long as you haven't changed them by more than the correct rounding. So in this case, I can choose to either do 3.2 times 1, or I can change it into 3 times 1. And I know when I do that math out, my answer should be about 3, or about 3.2 if I left it at 3.2. And that can help me if I'm struggling with where does that decimal point go when I'm multiplying with decimals, and we'll get to that in a later lesson. That estimation can help me be like, oh my gosh, like when I did this math, I got 323. Like, I clearly messed up somewhere because I know my answer should be about 3. So division's a little bit more complicated. When I'm looking at this problem, if I were to round these both to whole numbers, I would end up with 45 divided by 7, which isn't any easier for me to do mentally than 45.2 divided by 7.3. Remember, the purpose of estimating is to make the math easier to do in my head. So I want to specifically choose numbers that make that true. Now, if I follow my same rule as I had before, where I have only one digit of value, this would end up being 50 divided by 7. Again, that's not any easier for me to solve than the original problem. So it's important that I'm thinking in division specifically about numbers that are multiples of each other. So in this case, I actually want to take the second number and keep that one as exact as possible. So in division, that number you're dividing by tells me how many groups I'm making. So changing the number of groups will have a much greater impact than changing the total number that I'm putting into those groups. So it's really important that the second number changes as little as possible. So in this case, I want to take that second number and I want to keep it at 7. I want to make it a whole number. I don't want to have any decimals in there, but I don't want to change it any more than necessary. So now I need to look at this first number and think, what is the closest multiple of 7 to get to 45.2? So I might decide to go with 42, or I might decide to go with 49, which are both multiples of 7. I'm going to choose 42 because 42 is a little bit closer to 45 than 49 is. But both would give you a fairly accurate estimate. So notice that I didn't round this to the nearest 10 or the nearest whole number. I rounded it to the nearest multiple of 7. Okay, so that is important. So on your own, you're going to try these estimates. Make sure that you tell me which numbers you used. So if you look back here, notice I gave you a new equation that's like, these are the numbers I chose to use for my estimation. So make sure you do that as well when you're working on these. There are 2 questions here. So this is a 6-pack of stickers. That means that each pack of stickers has 6 stickers in it. That's what that means. Costs 135 pesos. I'm going to buy 18 packs of stickers. So remember, each pack has 6 stickers. So first I want you to estimate how many stickers I'm buying. So remember, don't do out the exact math. You're doing an estimation. So give me a new equation with the numbers that you're going to use to help make this math easier. And then about is a keyword for estimate. So about how much money does she spend? So estimate how much it's going to cost when I buy those 18 packs. Okay, so do those in your notebook, and then you can move on to the next task.